The blizzard doesn't care who you are. It falls on the powerful and the broken alike, burying everything under the same indifferent white. Luca Moretti understood this at 42 years old, riding in the back of an armored Escalade through a Chicago blizzard at 1:47 a.m., a tumbler of Barolo warming his palm, his mind running kill lists and supply routes with the detached efficiency of a man who had long ago removed the word feeling from his operational vocabulary. He had survived his father's assassination at 19. He had built the Moretti Syndicate into the most feared criminal organization north of the Mason-Dixon line by 30. He had buried men who tried to take his throne, and he had buried the one woman he'd ever loved, not in the ground, but in the locked basement of his own chest. 3 years ago, when she vanished without a trace and every lead went cold. He had been told she ran, that she chose money and a safer life, that she took what she needed from the penthouse safe and disappeared while he was in Miami, closing a deal that made 3 other families rich. He had believed it because the alternative, that something had happened to her, was a grief he refused to survive. Take Whacker toward the bridge. Luca ordered his driver, Marco, a young Sicilian with careful hands. I want to check the river access before the storm locks the route. Yes, boss. The Escalade turned. The windshield wipers fought the sleet in slow, heavy arcs. That's when Luca saw her. At a derelict bus stop on the far side of Whacker Drive, a woman sat hunched on a metal bench. She was wrapped in a thin blanket that the wind kept trying to steal. Her dark hair was plastered flat against her face by the ice. A cracked phone was pressed to her ear, her mouth moving fast, desperate, pleading, her free arm wrapped around a bundle pressed to her chest. Luca's eyes moved to the bundle. Then he saw there were 3. 3 small shapes, tucked against her body, each one still enough to be sleeping or still enough to be something worse. His hand hit the door handle before his brain issued the order. Boss, Marco said. Stop the car. The cold hit him like a wall of broken glass. Luca stepped onto the sidewalk, his charcoal overcoat catching the wind. His shoes sank into the gray slush. He crossed the empty street in long, controlled strides, his eyes locked on the woman who had not yet looked up. She was on the phone. The call kept dropping. He could hear it from 10 feet away, the stuttering static, the desperate reconnecting, the thin, exhausted voice. Please, I know it's late. I have 3 infants. The temperature is, hello? Hello? He stopped 4 feet away. The woman looked up, and the terror in her eyes was not the terror of surprise. It was not the startled look of a woman who didn't expect company. It was something far older and more specific, the biological, bone-deep terror of a creature who has been hunted for a very long time and has just been found. Sofia. His voice came out wrong. Too quiet, too raw for a man who hadn't said her name out loud in 3 years. She was on her feet instantly, pressing the 3 bundled infants against her body, backing into the frosted glass panel of the bus stop. Don't, she gasped. Her voice was cracked and thin with cold. Please. I kept the agreement. I stayed away. I never contacted anyone. Please, just leave us alone. What agreement? Luca stepped forward. She pressed back harder. Don't come closer. Sofia, you're shaking. I said don't. The wind screamed between them. One of the infants stirred, letting out a weak, high sound, not quite a cry. The sound of a small body losing its fight with the cold. Luca looked down. 3 faces, bundled in cheap fleece. 3 pairs of eyes either closed or barely open, cheeks flushed a dangerous, dusky blue at the edges. And then, the middle child, a boy, opened his eyes fully for just a second, blinking against the freezing air. The world stopped. The boy had dark hair, olive skin, and eyes that were the exact deep green Luca saw in the mirror every morning. The exact shade. The exact shape. The exact way they caught the light. The realization didn't arrive slowly. It arrived all at once, like the floor dropping out of a building. They're mine. It wasn't a question. It was a reckoning. Sofia's face crumpled. She pulled the babies tighter. They're nothing to you, she sobbed, her voice breaking apart. You sent me away. You said if I came back, you would finish the job. I did everything I was told. Please, please don't punish them for something I did. Luca stared at her. The word finish landed in his chest like a blade. What job? Sofia, what are you talking about? Don't, she begged, tears cutting through the freezing red of her cheeks. Don't stand there and pretend you don't know. I have the letter, Luca. I kept it. I kept it for 3 years in case something happened to me and someone needed to know why. The youngest baby let out another sound, weaker than the first. Luca looked at the child, then at Sofia, then at the frozen street behind her. No shelter, no warmth, no alternative. He dropped to one knee in the slush. His $1,000 suit made contact with the wet concrete. He didn't register it. I do not know what letter you have, he said, his voice stripped of everything except the truth. I do not know what agreement you are talking about. What I know is that those children are turning blue, and I have a heated car 10 feet away. Whatever happened between us, whatever you believe I did, it can be a conversation. But not out here. Not while they're dying. Sofia looked at the Escalade, then back at him. Her jaw was shaking, from cold or terror, he couldn't tell. If I get in that car, she whispered, I am trusting you with the only things in this world that matter to me. Then let me be worth it, Luca said quietly. Just this once. Let me be worth it. The middle baby, the boy with his eyes, let out a thin, exhausted cry. Sofia looked down at her children. She made a decision that cost her everything she had left. All right, she breathed. Luca was on his feet before the words finished leaving her mouth. Inside the Escalade, the warmth was violent in the best way. It hit the babies first. One by one they stopped shaking, the defensive rigidity of their small bodies slowly dissolving into the deep, exhausted sleep of the newly safe. Luca's security team, men who had seen everything the criminal world had to offer, handled the infants with a wordless, almost reverent gentleness. Sofia sat rigid in the center of the back seat, one baby in her lap, the other two secured on the seat beside her in makeshift nests of their warmest blankets. She had not taken her eyes off the door locks since they pulled away from the curb. Luca sat opposite her. He watched her. She had changed. 3 years had done what poverty and fear always do. They had carved away everything soft and left only the essential. She was thinner in some ways, heavier in others. The kind of weight that comes not from ease but from exhaustion, from stress, from eating whatever was cheapest so that 3 other people could eat first. Her coat was faded, the fabric pulled thin at the elbows. Her shoes had no business being outside in January. She was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. He kept that thought pressed down under 6 inches of controlled silence. Where are we going? Sofia asked. She didn't look at him. The estate. Her body went rigid. No. The children need a doctor tonight, Sofia. Not a walk-in clinic. A real physician who will not ask questions and will not call. The estate is where your men are, she said flatly. The estate is where you are in control of everything. Yes, Luca said simply. Which means nothing can touch you there. She turned to look at him for the first time since they'd left the bus stop. Her eyes searched his face with the careful, exhausted precision of someone who had been deceived before and survived it only through relentless vigilance. I have the letter with me, she said quietly. In my coat pocket. If anything happens to me tonight, if I disappear from that estate, I have made arrangements for it to be opened. Good, Luca said. Show it to me when we arrive. I want to see it. She blinked. That was not the response she had prepared for. The iron gates of the Moretti compound opened as the convoy approached. The main house rose up through the blizzard, all lit stone in disciplined symmetry, a fortress dressed as a mansion. Sofia stared at it through the window. He watched her expression cycle through fear, grief, and something he recognized as complicated longing. The feeling of a place that was once home becoming unrecognizable. You're still in the same house, she said softly. It's where I do business, he replied. I haven't called it home in 3 years. She didn't answer. But something in her shoulders shifted, just slightly, just barely, like a door opening a single inch into a room that had been locked for a very long time. As the car pulled under the stone portico, a figure appeared at the top of the front steps. Silver-haired, patrician, wrapped in a burgundy smoking jacket, holding a glass of cognac with the easy confidence of a man in his own home. He looked down at the arriving convoy with a warm, welcoming smile. Sofia made a sound Luca had never heard from her before. A small, compressed, involuntary sound, like a person absorbing a physical blow. "Who is that?" Luca asked. Sofia's face had gone completely white. "That," she whispered, "is the man who delivered the letter." The nursery smelled of warm milk and cedar. Dr. Ferraro, the syndicate's private physician, moved between the three cribs with a calm, practiced efficiency that Luca appreciated. The man knew how to separate his personal reaction from his medical one, and his personal reaction to discovering the boss had secret triplets was very clearly enormous. "Stable," Dr. Ferraro said quietly, completing his examination of the third infant. "Mild hypothermia across all three. The eldest shows signs of malnourishment. Nothing permanent if addressed immediately. I'll prescribe a high-calorie feeding supplement and return in the morning. They need warmth, sleep, and fluids. They will be fine, Mr. Moretti." He glanced at Luca with a carefully neutral expression. "They are remarkable children," he added. Then he packed his bag and left. Sofia sat on the edge of a chair beside the cribs, her coat finally off, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea that Rosa, the housekeeper, who had wept openly upon seeing Sofia and then immediately gotten to work, had pressed into her hands. She had not moved from the chair since they came upstairs. She watched the babies breathe with the unblinking vigilance of a woman who had spent 3 years being the only thing standing between them and the world. Luca sat across from her. He waited until the door closed. Then he held out his hand. She reached into the pocket of her old coat and withdrew a folded piece of paper. The folds had been opened and refolded so many times the creases were worn almost transparent. She handed it to him with the careful, specific reluctance of someone surrendering the only evidence they have. Luca unfolded it. The letterhead was his. The Moretti crest, the formal address, the weighted cream paper he used for official correspondence. The wax seal at the bottom, the Moretti lion deep burgundy, was perfect. Every ridge correct. His ring. His seal. His paper. He read the body of the letter. It was short. 3 sentences. The first confirmed that Sofia Bellini's presence in the city constituted a liability to the Moretti organization. The second stated that any child born from the described relationship would not be recognized and would be removed as a threat to the bloodline's integrity. The third was a directive: disappear completely within 48 hours or the matter will be resolved through other means. It was signed in his handwriting. It was not his handwriting. Luca looked at it for a long time. He turned it over. He held it up to the lamp. He pressed the seal with his thumb the way he always did, 3 times, firm, center first, and felt the microscopic imperfection in the lower quadrant that came from a mold made from a cast of his ring rather than the ring itself. "Someone made a copy of my seal," he said, his voice very quiet. "I know that now," Sofia replied. She looked at her hands. "I didn't know it then. Tell me everything. From the moment I left for Miami." She told him. The courier had arrived 2 days after Luca flew out. A man she didn't recognize, wearing a mask, with a slight but very specific hitch in his right step. He delivered a black envelope. Inside, the letter, and enough cash to survive a year. She had called Luca's private line immediately. No answer. She called the estate. She was told he was unreachable. She called Declan, his second. She was told Declan was with Luca and unavailable. She had been effectively cut off from every contact point simultaneously, which told her the organization had been mobilized, which told her the letter was real. She had 48 hours. She left. She had been 2 weeks pregnant when she crossed the city line. She discovered it in a gas station bathroom 3 states away, staring at a test strip under fluorescent light, completely alone. "I named the boy after you," she said softly. "His middle name. He doesn't know it yet. He's only 3. The last sentence landed on Luca like a physical weight. He's only 3. 3 years of first words, first steps, first everything. A life that had happened entirely without him. "The man with the limp," Luca said, his voice terrifyingly steady. "Describe him again." "Older. Tall, silver hair at the temples. The limp was in his right hip, like an old injury that never fully healed. Luca went very still. Lorenzo Cattaneo had taken a bullet in the right hip for Luca's father 23 years ago. He had walked with that specific hitch in his step every day since. He had attended Luca's confirmation. He had taught Luca to shoot. He had sat at the head of the table as consigliere for 11 years, and had called Luca's son more times than Luca's actual father had. "Stay in this room," Luca said. He stood up. "Lock the door. Do not open it for anyone but me or Rosa." "Luca, what are you going to do?" He looked at her once. Just once. Something moved across his face that she hadn't seen there before. Not rage, but the specific, cold grief of a man who has just identified the source of the wound. "I'm going to verify something," he said. "And then I'm going to do what I should have done before I let that man near anything I valued." He walked out. The door locked behind him. In the hallway, Luca passed the row of security monitors mounted on the wall. He paused. On the monitor labeled library, Lorenzo's preferred room, the one he occupied most evenings, a figure was visible. Lorenzo stood at the antique writing desk, his back to the camera. His hand was moving over papers spread on the surface. The papers, even at monitor resolution, were recognizable. They were the Moretti estate ledgers. The private ones from the vault. The ones no one touched without Luca's explicit authorization. Lorenzo had been in the vault. Luca did not go to the library. He went to the vault first. The private study on the 3rd floor. The painting on the east wall. The thumbprint scanner and the 7-digit code that only 4 people in the world possessed. He opened the heavy steel door and began pulling ledgers. He worked methodically, cross-referencing 3 years of offshore accounts against the transfer logs. What he found did not announce itself dramatically. It arrived in small, incremental numbers, modest withdrawals, spread across dozens of accounts, timed to coincide with the quarter-end reconciliations when discrepancies were most likely to be absorbed without scrutiny. Over 3 years, Lorenzo had moved $4 million out of the Moretti operating accounts. Not enough to notice at a glance. Precisely enough to fund a parallel operation for years. Luca replaced the ledgers exactly as he found them. Then, in the morning, with Sofia still locked safely in the nursery suite, he moved to the second thing. The man who had thrown her and 3 infants into a Chicago blizzard. The building superintendent, a fleshy, contemptuous man named Gerald Voss, who managed 6 rental properties on the city's south side, was brought to a meeting room on the estate's lower level before 9 a.m. He arrived still in his overcoat, expecting some kind of offer. He had heard the Moretti name. He assumed money was coming. Luca sat across the table from him in silence for a long moment. "You locked a woman and 3 infants out of their unit last night," Luca said. "In a blizzard. Because she was 1 day short on rent she had in her pocket." Voss shifted. "I have a business to run, Mr. Romano. Romano, right? I heard it was." "Moretti," Luca said quietly. "And the woman is under my protection." Voss understood in the specific, biological way that prey understands the presence of a predator. The color left his face, starting at the lips. Luca's attorney placed a set of documents on the table. Transfer of property management contracts. Personal account signatures. Notarized, prepared before dawn. "You sign these, you walk out of here, and you leave the city within 48 hours, Luca said. "You never speak of the woman or the children. You never conduct business in Chicago again." "And if I don't sign?" Luca looked at him with an expression entirely devoid of performance. "Then we discover together how long a man can survive in a room that has the same temperature and amenities as the basement unit you rented to a mother of 3 for $800 a month." Voss signed. Sofia, watching through the one-way glass of the adjacent room, said nothing for a very long time after the man was escorted out. "Then, you didn't hurt him." "I gave him a proportionate consequence," Luca replied. "He is a small man who hurt you because you appeared powerless. The correction is to make him powerless. Actual pain is reserved for actual enemies." Sofia turned to look at him. She was trying to reconcile the man in front of her with the monster described in the letter she had carried for 3 years. Then who are your actual enemies? She asked quietly. Before Luca could answer, his encrypted phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. A text from his security chief. Lorenzo requested access to the fleet vehicle logs this morning. Luca read the text twice. Lorenzo had no operational reason to access the fleet logs. The fleet logs contained one thing of relevance that morning: the route Luca had taken to retrieve Sofia and the children. Lorenzo was not checking maintenance schedules. He was confirming what had happened last night. He was assessing what Luca now knew, and calculating how much time he had left. The trap was already closing. That evening, Luca called his most trusted analyst, a quiet man named Enzo who had worked the syndicate's financial intelligence for 15 years, and gave him 12 hours and unrestricted access to every Moretti account from the past 3 years. By 2 a.m., Enzo came to Luca's study with a face like a man delivering a terminal diagnosis. The money was only the beginning. Lorenzo had not merely skimmed operating accounts. He had, over 3 years, systematically transferred controlling interests in 4 of the Moretti syndicate's most profitable port operations into a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands. The shell company had a director. The director was a nominee. The nominee was traceable, through 3 layers of corporate structure, to a single name: Rodrigo Salcedo, head of the Colombian Salcedo cartel's North American Logistics Division. Lorenzo had been selling the Moretti empire to the Salcedo cartel, piece by piece, for 3 years. And the reason he had moved so freely, so invisibly, for so long, was that the one person most likely to notice was gone. Sofia, Luca said. Enzo looked up from his documents. She worked in the estate office 3 years ago, Luca said, his voice very quiet. She handled the incoming correspondence. She would have seen the early transfer documents, before Lorenzo had a clean system in place. Boss, Enzo said carefully, if she saw even a partial transfer in those early weeks. He didn't drive her away to protect the bloodline, Luca finished. His voice had gone completely flat. He drove her away because she was going to inadvertently destroy his entire operation. She didn't even know what she'd seen. She was just in the wrong place at the moment the first transfers were being organized. Enzo waited. She raised 3 children in a basement, Luca said, so that Lorenzo Cattaneo could sell my family's legacy to a cartel. The silence in the room was absolute. What do you want to do, boss? Luca stood up. He buttoned his jacket. He looked out at the frozen grounds of the estate, the snow still falling, the lights of the perimeter casting long gold shadows across the white. I want to have a conversation, Luca said. I want to sit with him and look him in the eye and give him the opportunity to tell me the truth. And then I want to watch what he does instead. Lorenzo has been 3 steps ahead for 3 years. Does he know that Luca knows? And if he does, what is his contingency? The library after midnight. Luca opened the heavy door without knocking. Lorenzo was in his customary armchair by the fireplace, an old man by all appearances, silver and settled, entirely at home in the warmth. Vivaldi on the record player, a snifter of cognac catching the firelight. He looked up and smiled the way he always had, warmly, paternally, as if Luca's appearance was the best thing that had happened to his evening. You're up late, Lorenzo said. Sit down. You look terrible. Long night, Luca agreed. He walked to the bar cart. He poured 2 glasses of the Louis XIII and carried them to the fireplace, handing one to Lorenzo, keeping one for himself. He sat in the chair across from him, the same chair he had sat in hundreds of times over 20 years, listening to this man teach him how to survive. The children are stable? Lorenzo asked, his voice carrying the practiced warmth of genuine concern. They're healthy, Luca said. They're extraordinary, actually. They look like you. They do. A pause. The fire crackled. Outside, the blizzard pressed against the leaded glass windows. Sofia claims she received a communication, Luca said conversationally, 3 years ago, telling her to disappear. A shock, Lorenzo said, his expression appropriately troubled. Do you believe her? The letter had my seal on it, Luca said. A copy of my seal. Very good work. Almost perfect. Almost, Lorenzo repeated. You noticed an imperfection? In the lower quadrant, the cast was taken from the ring directly, but the artisan didn't account for the weight differential when the wax sets. The impression is approximately 2% shallow. Lorenzo's expression remained completely still. Remarkable eye. My father taught me, Luca said. He looked at Lorenzo. You were there when he taught me. Do you remember? His study summer, I was 11. He said, the seal is not a formality. It is a fingerprint. Know every ridge of it. Know every imperfection. Because if someone forges it, you need to be able to prove it in a room full of men who want to believe the forgery is real. Something shifted, almost imperceptibly, in the lines around Lorenzo's eyes. Your father was a wise man, he said. He was, Luca agreed. You know what else he taught me? He said the most dangerous betrayal never comes from an enemy. It comes from the man who knows what you love and waits for the right moment to use it against you. The fire popped. A log shifted. The Vivaldi played on. I've also been looking at the port accounts, Luca said, his voice still entirely conversational. Interesting reading. 4 million missing, spread over 36 months. And 4 port operations quietly transferred into a Cayman entity that traces to Rodrigo Salcedo. Lorenzo set his cognac glass down on the side table. The glass made no sound. His hand was perfectly steady. Luca, he said. His voice had changed. The warmth was gone, replaced by something cleaner and more honest, which was somehow more frightening. You need to understand that what I did was not betrayal. It was succession planning. You were incapacitated by grief. The organization needed leadership. The Salcedo partnership was the most strategically sound. You put my children in a gutter, Luca said simply. For 3 years. To protect a business arrangement. Lorenzo looked at him. The girl was a liability. Her name, Luca said, is Sofia. He stood up. He straightened his jacket. He looked down at the man who had taught him everything he knew, and felt something close to sadness. Not for what he was about to do, but for the version of this man he had believed in for 40 years. I want to tell you something, Luca said quietly. When I was 17, before my father died, he told me there would come a day when I would have to act against someone I loved. He said the measure of a man is not whether he can act in that moment. The measure of a man is whether he can do it without becoming something he is ashamed of. Lorenzo watched him warily. I am going to call a full council meeting tomorrow morning, Luca said. Every capo, every regional lieutenant, every underboss. Under the bloodline clause, the one you yourself drafted 15 years ago. I will present the financial records, the correspondence logs, the Cayman transfer documents, and the forged letter with the imperfect seal. He paused. I will also present Sofia and my children. You are making a mistake, Lorenzo said. His voice was very quiet now. Possibly, Luca agreed. But it is mine to make. That's what you spent 20 years teaching me. He walked to the door. Get some sleep, Lorenzo, he said. Tomorrow is going to be a long day for both of us. He did not look back, but as he pulled the library door shut behind him, he heard the sound of Lorenzo's chair moving, and then the faint, rapid sound of Lorenzo's encrypted phone coming alive. He was already making calls, which meant tonight was not going to be the long night Luca had planned. Tonight was going to be something else entirely. At 4:47 a.m., Luca's security chief woke him with 3 words through the earpiece. They're moving now. Lorenzo had spent the night quietly. He had sent 3 messages, not to the council, not to outside families, but to the 3 capos most financially indebted to him personally. 3 men who had borrowed against syndicate assets to cover private gambling debts. 3 men whose financial survival depended entirely on Lorenzo's continued silence about those debts. He had called in what he was owed. By morning, those 3 capos had contacted 5 others. By the time the full council convened in the estate boardroom at 9 a.m., 60 men representing the full reach of the Moretti syndicate's power from Chicago to New York to Vegas. Lorenzo had already laid the groundwork for what appeared to be a legitimate motion. A vote of confidence in Luca's leadership, prompted by the security risk of an unauthorized individual gaining access to the estate. The unauthorized individual being Sofia. Luca stood at the head of the table and watched it unfold with the cold, interior calm of a man who had anticipated exactly this. Lorenzo sat 3 chairs down, composed, rested, utterly in control. "The matter before the council," Lorenzo said, "is simple. We have a stranger in this house who arrived last night under emotional, rather than operational circumstances. The council has a right to evaluate whether this constitutes a security breach." Murmurs ran the length of the table. Not agreement, but not resistance either. These were men who respected procedure. "I will note," Luca said, "that the stranger in question is the mother of my 3 legitimate heirs, currently sleeping in the East Wing nursery. Under the Moretti bloodline clause, their presence in this estate is not a security matter. It is a succession matter. And under that same clause, the council's composition for any succession discussion includes all regional lieutenants, not the inner circle alone." He produced a copy of the charter. He placed it on the table. Enzo had flagged the relevant section at 3 a.m. Lorenzo looked at the document. Something moved behind his eyes, the calculation of a man reassessing a board he thought he had mapped. "Furthermore," Luca said, "I have financial records I would like to present to this council. They concern 3 years of account transfers from Moretti operating funds into a Cayman shell entity connected to the Salcedo cartel." The room went very still. 60 pairs of eyes moved to Lorenzo. Lorenzo's face did not change. His voice was smooth, unhurried, perfectly calibrated. "Those documents are fabrications prepared by a woman with a motive to destabilize this council." "The motive being?" Luca asked. "Survival. She arrived with nothing. She is building a case for her continued presence in this house. It is manipulation, and the council should not be." "She saw you," a voice said from the doorway. The room turned. Sofia stood in the doorway in a plain gray dress, her hair down, her hands still. She had no jewelry, no preparation, no armor. She looked exactly like what she was, a woman who had survived 3 years on nerve alone, and had one more act of it left in her. "I was in the estate office 3 years ago," she said. Her voice was steady. "I was sorting correspondence. I came across a packet of transfer documents. I didn't know what they were. I mentioned them to Luca at dinner that night. Casually. Not because I understood their significance. Because I thought it was unusual paperwork." She looked at Lorenzo. "You were sitting across from me at that dinner table. I saw your face when I said it." The silence in the room was absolute. "The next morning," Sofia continued, "a courier came to the apartment. She reached into the pocket of her dress and withdrew the letter. She walked to the table and placed it in the center. This is the letter. This is the seal. And the man who delivered it had a limp in his right hip from a bullet taken in the line of Moretti service 23 years ago." Every man in the room knew exactly which limp she meant. Lorenzo stood up. His composure was extraordinary. She would later think that was the most frightening thing about him. "This is a performance," he said calmly. "Coached, prepared, rehearsed. The council should." "Sit down, Lorenzo," said the voice of Aldo Ferri, the oldest capo at the table, a man who had served 3 Moretti bosses. He was looking at the financial documents Luca had placed before him. His voice was very quiet. "Sit down and be quiet." Lorenzo looked at the table. For the first time, his composure fractured, not dramatically but precisely. The finest crack in a wall just before it gives. He sat down. The vote took 11 minutes. Lorenzo is neutralized publicly. But a man like Lorenzo doesn't prepare for one outcome. What was his contingency? And did he move it into place last night, before the council convened? The council voted to strip Lorenzo of his title, his accounts, and his position in the syndicate. The vote was 53-7, the 7 being the men he had compromised, and even 2 of those broke at the last moment. Luca stood outside the boardroom afterward, in the cool quiet of the hallway, while his men processed the organizational fallout inside. Sofia found him there. She stood beside him. Not touching, not speaking. Just present, the way people stand next to each other when the acute crisis has passed and the larger, quieter one begins. "He raised me," Luca said. His voice was entirely flat. Not performatively controlled, genuinely flat, the way a voice goes when the emotion is too large to fit inside normal inflection. He was at my father's funeral. He was the first person I called when I inherited the seat. I know, Sofia said quietly. I thought he was the one thing in my life that wasn't transactional. I know. When you disappeared, he stopped. Restarted. He was the one who told me you'd taken cash from the safe. He was the one who built the narrative that you'd run. He sat across from me for 3 years and watched me grieve you. He watched me run the organization in a way that was angrier and colder and more destructive than I would have been if. Don't, Sofia said. Not tonight. He looked at her. There will be time, she said carefully, to understand what it cost both of us. But right now you need to be in this moment, not in that one. He studied her face for a long moment. How are you this composed? I'm not, she said honestly. I'm catastrophically not. But my children are asleep upstairs, and they need one of us to keep standing. Something in Luca's chest shifted. The specific, profound movement of a man encountering a strength he hadn't expected and hadn't earned the right to rely on yet. What happens to Lorenzo? She asked. The council wanted the traditional resolution, Luca said. I overruled them. Why? Because I don't need him dead to be finished with him, Luca replied. Death would make him consequential. I want him to be nothing. That evening, Lorenzo was escorted to the city limits. His coat was taken. His phone was taken. His accounts were frozen, his properties transferred, his name struck from every Moretti record in existence. He was deposited on the same block in the same neighborhood where Sofia had spent the worst year of her exile. No introduction was made. He simply appeared there in the cold with nothing and began to understand for the first time what nothing actually feels like. 3 days later, the estate was quiet in the way that only comes after long storms. Sofia was in the nursery, cross-legged on the floor, playing an elaborate and mostly incomprehensible game with Marco, Lucia, and Nico that appeared to involve a great many stuffed animals and very serious negotiations. The morning light through the tall windows was winter white and clean. The 3 children were warm and fed and making the specific joyful noise of small people who have not yet learned to be afraid of happiness. Luca appeared in the doorway. She had heard him coming. He always walked with that particular weight, a heaviness of presence that announced itself before the person did. Can I come in? She gestured to the floor beside her. He lowered himself onto the expensive Persian rug in his bespoke charcoal suit without a second's hesitation. Marco immediately climbed onto his leg, regarded him with the frank, assessing stare of a 3-year-old, and then returned to the stuffed animal negotiations as if the decision had been made and required no further ceremony. Luca looked at his son with an expression he clearly was not fully in control of. I owe you something, he said quietly to Sofia, his eyes still on Marco. You owe me nothing, Sofia replied. That's not. I mean it as a statement of freedom, not absolution, she said. You don't owe me. Which means if I choose to stay, it isn't debt. And if I choose to leave, it isn't ingratitude. He looked at her then. Are you considering leaving? I'm considering what kind of life my children will have in this house, she said honestly. I'm considering what I want for them, and for me, and whether those things are compatible with what you are and what this place is. That's a reasonable thing to consider. Yes, she agreed. It is. The stuffed animal negotiations reached a critical juncture. Lucia, who appeared to be the most authoritative of the 3, issued a firm directive. Luca listened to it with complete seriousness. What does she want? He asked Sofia. More bears, Sofia said. She always wants more bears. It's non-negotiable. I'll have Rosa find more bears, he said. A silence. Clean, not tense. I'm not asking you to forgive what happened, Luca said finally. I'm not asking you to pretend the last 3 years didn't occur. I would like to ask, if you are willing to let me be in the room while you decide. Not to pressure the decision. Just to be present for it. Sofia looked at him for a long moment. You can be in the room, she said. It was not a declaration. It was not a commitment. It was something more honest than both, an opening freely given, with full knowledge of the cost. That evening, Rosa knocked on Luca's study door and entered carrying a garment bag with the name of a Milan atelier embossed on the front. It arrived this morning, signore. The order you placed in October. Luca stared at the bag. He had ordered it 3 years ago, a dress, commissioned to Sofia's measurements, for a gala he had been planning to take her to. He had cancelled the event. He had forgotten to cancel the order. It had been sitting in production for 3 years, waiting. Put it in her room, he said quietly. Don't say where it came from. Just put it there. 6 weeks later, the Moretti estate had been transformed. Every room of the main house was lit with the warm, formal glow of 300 candles. White flowers, January roses, forced from winter greenhouses at considerable expense, cascaded from every surface. The ballroom, which occupied the entire east wing of the ground floor, had been opened for the first time in 4 years. The guest list, 240 names. Every major family in the American syndicate. Politicians who had been in the Moretti organization's pocket for decades. Judges, commissioners, aldermen, architects of the city's invisible power structure. All gathered, officially, for the formal christening of the Moretti triplets. Unofficially, and everyone understood this, they were gathered to look at the woman who was going to stand beside Luca Moretti from this moment forward, and decide in the calculus of powerful men whether she was real, whether she was worthy, and whether she was a liability or a queen. Sofia stood in the east dressing room, facing the full-length mirror, and tried to breathe. The dress was a marvel. She had found it in her room 3 weeks ago, with no note, no explanation, only the atelier bag and the specific, aching beauty of a garment that had been made for her body, to her measurements 3 years before. She had understood immediately what it meant. Not as a romantic gesture, as an acknowledgement. I was building a life that included you. I have always been building a life that included you. She had cried for a long time. Then she had tried it on. It was a deep emerald silk, the color of the Moretti family stone, which she had not known when she chose it to describe at the atelier, and which Luca had chosen deliberately when he commissioned it. The cut was structured at the bodice to support and present the full, soft weight of her figure without apology, the silk falling from her hips in deep, liquid folds that made movement feel like water. It was not a dress designed to conceal. It was a dress designed to announce. Around her neck, Rosa had placed the Moretti emeralds, stones last worn by Luca's mother, kept in the vault for a generation, brought out this morning with a ceremony that made the housekeeper's hands shake. Sofia looked at the woman in the mirror. She looked for the ghost from the bus stop. She looked for the woman who had eaten crackers for dinner, so her children could have something warm. She looked for the woman who had been made to feel invisible for 3 years by the accumulated weight of poverty and fear and the specific, grinding cruelty of the world toward people it has decided don't matter. She found her. She was still there, in the set of the jaw, in the particular way the shoulders held, the posture of someone who had learned to take up as little space as possible as a survival mechanism. Sofia straightened her spine. She let the shoulders drop back. She let herself take up exactly as much space as she required. "Signora," Rosa said softly, appearing in the mirror behind her. The housekeeper's eyes were bright. "You are ready." "I look like someone who didn't break," Sofia said. Rosa made a sound like a held sob and a laugh arriving at the same moment. "You look like a queen who earned every stone." A knock at the door. Luca entered. He was in a midnight blue Tom Ford tuxedo that fitted him the way expensive things always fitted Luca, as if they had been designed around him specifically, as if the world organized itself to accommodate his dimensions. He stopped when he saw her. 3 full seconds of silence. She had known him for 5 years. She had watched him negotiate with men who put guns on conference tables. She had seen him walk into rooms that were actively hostile to his existence and systematically rearrange those rooms to his specifications. She had never, in 5 years, seen him without words. He crossed the room. He took her face in both hands, the careful, specific way of a person handling something they know to be irreplaceable, and he looked at her for a long moment. 3 years, he said quietly. I thought about you every day for 3 years. Not as a ghost. As you. This. Exactly this. Sofia placed one hand over his. Don't make me ruin the makeup, she said. The ghost of something crossed his face that in a different man, in a different life, might have been called a smile. He offered her his arm. Are you ready to walk into that room? He asked. She looked at the mirror one last time. At the emeralds at her throat, at the dress that had been commissioned 3 years ago by a man who was already certain, at the 3 small faces she had spent 3 years keeping warm and alive and laughing. I've been ready since the bus stop, she said. I just needed to get here. The ballroom went silent when the doors at the top of the staircase opened. Not the polite, orchestrated silence of a formal announcement. The specific, involuntary silence of 240 people simultaneously recalibrating their expectations. They had expected a certain kind of woman. The underworld always expected a certain kind of woman beside its leaders, decorative, discreet, performing the function of legitimacy without troubling the architecture of power. They had heard the story of the bus stop, the triplets, the exile, the return. They had heard it and constructed, in the way powerful people construct convenient narratives, a version that made sense to them. A tragic backstory, a woman restored to her station, a touching symbol of the boss's capacity for personal loyalty. What they saw at the top of the staircase was not a symbol. Sofia stood at the landing in the emerald dress and her family's stones and the posture of a woman who had decided, on a frozen bus stop bench at 1:47 in the morning, that her children would not die in the dark. She did not scan the room anxiously. She looked at it, all of it, the assembled power of the American criminal world, gathered in its formal best, looking up at her. She held the look. Luca did not wait at the bottom of the stairs. He came up to meet her, ascending, not receiving, because this was not a presentation. This was a partnership announcing itself on its own terms. He took her hand. He turned to face the room with her. He began to speak. He spoke about the betrayal. He spoke about the 3 years and what had been stolen. He spoke about Lorenzo and the Salcedo connection, and the financial crime, and the forged letter. He spoke about his children, their names, their characters, Marco's gravity, Lucia's authority, Nico's startling laughter. He spoke as the head of the family, which he was. And then, midway through his address, Sofia stepped forward. It was not planned. There was no signal, no arrangement. She simply stepped forward and Luca, to the visible astonishment of every man in the room, stepped back. Not away. Just back, giving her the space. She looked at the assembled families. I want to say something, she said. Her voice was clear, and even in the acoustics of the ballroom. Not as a wife. Not as a mother. As the woman who sat on a bus stop in a blizzard with 3 infants and a phone with 11% battery, deciding whether the world deserved the effort of surviving another day. The room was absolutely still. Someone in this organization, she said, decided that I was disposable, that what I had seen, what I knew, what I might accidentally say, made me a problem to be removed. They were not wrong about the threat I posed. They were wrong about what kind of threat I was. She looked across the room. At the capos. At the politicians. At the men who had weighed her on a scale that morning and found her wanting. I am not here because Luca Moretti brought me back. I am here because I kept my children alive for 3 years in conditions that none of you have ever had to endure, and I did it while being hunted by your own organization, and I am still standing. That is not sentiment. That is a qualification. No one spoke. I don't ask for your approval, Sofia said. I ask for your attention. Because the Moretti family has 3 new heirs, and I intend to raise them in full view of this council, and I intend to be as present and as informed and as engaged in this organization's future as any person sitting in this room. If that is a problem, I encourage you to raise it now. While I can hear you. The silence held for a long, vertiginous moment. Then Aldo Ferri, the oldest capo, the man who had served 3 Moretti bosses, stood up from his chair at one of the ballroom tables below. He was 71 years old and moved slowly, and the act of standing was not casual. Every person in the room understood its weight. He raised his glass. To the family, he said. 240 glasses rose. The sound of it filled the ballroom like a tide coming in. Later, much later, the guests had gone. The ballroom was being quietly restored. The estate moved into its nighttime rhythms, the distant sound of the security rotation, the close, warm silence of the sleeping house. Sofia stood on the terrace off the second floor, wrapped in a coat that Rosa had brought her, a new one, heavy wool, in the deep green of the dress. She had her hands around a cup of tea, and her eyes on the city. The blizzard had long since blown itself out. The sky was clear for the first time in days, the stars hard and bright and indifferent above the orange glow of Chicago's frozen sprawl. The terrace door opened. Luca stepped out, his tuxedo jacket gone, his shirt open at the collar. He stood beside her. They looked at the city together. Marco asked me tonight, Luca said, whether the big house was going to be his house now. What did you tell him? I told him it was going to be his house when he was old enough to deserve it. He said that was a very long time. A pause. He's not wrong. Sofia smiled into her tea. He's very serious for 3. He gets it from you. He gets it from both of us, she said. That's going to be a problem when he's 15. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. The new kind of comfortable, the kind that hadn't existed between them 3 weeks ago and had been built carefully, deliberately, without assumptions. Sofia, Luca said. What you said tonight, in the ballroom. That wasn't what I was expecting. I know. It was better, he said quietly, than anything I had planned, or anything I could have said. She looked at him. I've spent 3 years being the woman things happened to, she said. I'm finished with that. He looked back. Good, he said. And the word carried the full weight of everything he meant by it. The relief, the respect, the specific gratitude of a man who had been taught, at some cost, that the thing he had been trying to protect all along was not something fragile. He reached out. He took her hand. She let him. Below them, the city glittered under its skin of ice, indifferent and extraordinary, the way cities always are, full of people surviving in the dark, full of warmth behind closed windows, full of the specific human determination to keep going in the face of every reason not to. She had come to a bus stop with a dying phone and 3 reasons to keep going. She had done exactly that. The world had called her invisible for 3 years. It had miscalculated. The most dangerous thing in the Moretti empire was not its money, or its men, or the cold precision of its boss. It was the woman standing on the terrace who had survived everything the empire threw at her, and chosen, with full knowledge of the cost, to walk back through its doors anyway. Not because she needed its protection, because she had decided at last that it needed hers.